The M1 iPad Pro is a great machine. I've been using it as my primary mobile computer for personal tasks, for running this channel, for running the website, for about 18 months. It slots in really nicely as a MacBook Air alternative. As you might imagine, I've recently migrated to the M4 13-inch Pro, and I thought it might be helpful to do what I hope is a slightly more nuanced comparison between the two machines, in case you're looking to potentially upgrade. And I want to do more than just compare specs, because you did know you could just go to apple.com and do that, right? Anyway, let's get into it. The 13-inch M4 iPad Pro goes from about 1.5 pounds down to 1.28 pounds. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, and honestly, if you mostly use your iPad in the Magic Keyboard on the desk, then it really doesn't matter, right? But if you're a person who likes to be more mobile with just the iPad, getting it lighter actually matters. Remember, a tablet is meant to be held for longer periods of time than your phone, so getting arm or wrist fatigue is a real thing. So every ounce actually matters when you're designing a product like this. I imagine at this point, most people are using their iPad in a case. But if you're not, the M4 iPad Pro gives you a new option in place of space gray, which is space black. Feels maybe a little bit more intentional than space gray, if that makes sense. I don't know if a color can be intentional. After so many years of space gray and so many shades of space gray, it just feels tired. The fact that the M4 offers you something different and something that is actually better is a win for the M4, especially if you go for that black Magic Keyboard. It's hard to beat that black on black. So it's not a stretch or surprising at all to say that on paper, the M4 chip is faster than the M1 chip. I mean, it should be, that makes sense. But if you're an iPadOS user, you know that day to day, the chip almost doesn't really matter. iPadOS is very well optimized compared to laptop OS. So on iPadOS, where you see those performance gains are in specific long-running tasks like exports or renders. For example, I tested exporting my last video on both my M1 and my M4 iPad Pros just to get a feel for what the performance delta would be, and these were the numbers. Now, a few minutes may not seem like a lot, but it adds up over time, especially since Final Cut on iPad has that unfortunate restriction of only being able to export in the foreground. Depending on the apps you use, you'll probably have your own examples of tasks that take some time and could be faster. And that's where you'll see the benefit of the M4 chip. So I want to talk about the display, but this isn't really another thing about the OLED display and the better contrast and the deep blacks. You've probably heard about that, and you can hear about that pretty much anywhere else. What I wanted to do was talk briefly about motion blur and image persistence. You know what goes a long way towards making a device feel faster? Faster pixel response times. It turns out that a less obvious benefit of OLED is actually that a pixel can respond in as little as 0.001 milliseconds. Mini LED on the M1 iPad Pro is a great screen technology, I'm still a fan, and it can respond in as little as 10 milliseconds. So there isn't a ton of documentation on the response times of the new iPad Pros, but anecdotally, I and a few others have noticed that the content feels smoother. Even though both devices have a ProMotion display, the faster pixel response time actually matters in just the overall feel of the M4 iPad Pro. Again, not a hugely obvious benefit, but is a benefit nonetheless. Apple touted 20% better thermal performance than the M2 iPad Pro. And while it still feels a bit early days to make a judgment, one interesting area I'm seeing improvement is in the Notes app. On my M1, the center of the iPad quickly becomes warm as I'm taking notes using the Apple Pencil. Now, the M4 doesn't completely get rid of this, but in my usage, it does feel less warm in that same spot. Apple mentioned they added graphite sheets and copper behind the Apple logo to help with heat disbursement, and it seems to be working so far. Anecdotally as well, I spend a lot of time with my iPad connected to my Thunderbolt display. I spent all of yesterday working that way actually, and the M1 could get a little toasty, and when I pick up my M4 after being in the dock all day, it is a little warm, but again, not nearly as warm as the M1 model. Now, some of that could be down to the magnetic stand I was using, but it's a data point I wanted to bring forward just in case. The M4 Pro had surprisingly lost a few features over its predecessors, one of which was the ultra-wide camera, which was added with the 2020 iPad Pro. Now, in everyday photo taking, such as it is, I haven't noticed a huge difference. But if you used that 0.5 option in the camera app, that's something to be aware of. So after living with this thing for over a week, I can safely say that the new Magic Keyboard is better than its predecessor in every way. The aluminum top case makes the whole thing look and feel so much better and so much more premium. It's what you really want from an accessory that starts at $300. And like I mentioned in my previous video on the M4, you don't realize what a quality of life improvement it is to have a quiet haptic trackpad over the louder diving board based trackpad in the previous Magic Keyboard. I mean, this might just be a nerd thing, but it's so much nicer working from this Magic Keyboard because it's quieter. And to me, that's one of the reasons you work from an iPad. iPads have never had fans, so they've always operated silently, and I would think you want your accessories to operate as silently as possible as well. The new Magic Keyboard does fold back ever so slightly more than the previous model. Not a huge incentive to upgrade, but it is a data point. So I'm not the type of person to try to convince you to throw away a machine that's working perfectly fine for you just because something new is out. My goal is, as always, as someone who uses an iPad every day in a productive manner, I just wanted to give some perspective between the two machines if you're potentially considering an upgrade. If you want a general upgrade advice, I mean, I feel like if the M1 is working for you, if the M1's doing everything you want it to do and you don't feel like it's slow, stay on that M1. Don't upgrade until that thing starts falling apart. But if you're intrigued by some of the things I talked about, like the lighter design, which matters maybe more than it being thinner, and the improved thermals, I don't think you can go wrong with the M4 iPad Pro. As usual, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you for hanging out with me. If you could like on your way out and subscribe to the channel, that would help me and the channel out a bunch. And as always, I will catch you in the next one.